Scott Galloway is with me, the professor of marketing at NYU. Scott, so we know where you stand.
Yeah.
Should it be broken up?
Oh, 100%. We want to oxygenate the economy. We want those numbers on the screen to continue to be green. If you were to break this company up, distinct of the weaponization of the platforms, distinct of the power, distinct of their inability to prohibit bad actors from weaponizing their platforms, let's make the shareholder argument. If you look at almost every major breakup, whether it was telcos or the oil companies, several years post the breakup, the combined companies were worth a great deal more than the original companies.
But you take, for example, Facebook.
Yep.
I mean, it only put WhatsApp in there a few years ago, and Instagram came along a bit late after that.
Yep.
You're breaking things up. I mean, normally, think of IBM, Standard Oil, AT&T, companies that have been around decades.
Yep.
He's been around minnows.
Well, but look at the power. I mean, and this will hit close to home, but when the DOJ filed the suit against AT&T's acquisition of Time Warner, they were worried about bringing together 130 million people in terms of AT&T contracts and DirecTV. Yet we're going to let WhatsApp, Instagram, and Messenger encrypt a back-end communications platform that reaches 2.7 billion people.
But the argument Facebook makes, and I'd like to hear you tell me why you think it's wrong, is that there's plenty of choice. There are loads of alternatives, for example, to a messenger service. There are alternatives to an Instagram. Maybe they're not as successful, but there are alternatives available. And it's not Facebook's problem or Google's problem that they've been successful.
Well, it's not their problem. It's not, and they haven't done, I would argue they haven't done anything wrong, but I don't agree with the fact there's alternatives. There hasn't been a major social media network of any real substance founded since 2011. I mean, where do you go? If you shut off Facebook and you want to reach your sisters and your mom back in Britain, where do you go? What messaging platforms or social media networks are out there? This company literally controls 80–90% of social media traffic. So this kind of defines monopoly. I mean, if you look at the fastest growing parts of our economy, social, search, devices, there's typically one or two companies that control almost all of it.
So which of them would you break up?
Sure.
So I mean, because, Facebook, you've done, yes?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about criteria. First, you want to restore competition. And secondly, you also don't want to kneecap these companies. You want their shareholders to benefit. You want sort of a Goldilocks strategy. So the most obvious one, or I think the easiest one, is Amazon spinning AWS. Because on the spin, AWS is one of the 10 most valuable companies in the world. And Amazon can no longer subsidize their retail platform with the profits from AWS. When the Chinese came in and priced steel below price costs in the 80s, we called it dumping. When Amazon subsidizes the retail platform with AWS, we call it innovation. On the spin, the shareholders benefit. AWS has a bigger market as an independent company, Richard, because Walmart won't use AWS right now because it's owned by a competitor. So AWS thrives, more competition, better for the economy, better for the planet.
And to the argument, well, yes, but we'll pay more for Amazon because there won't be that subsidy that exists.
Well, so that's a correct question, because right now all antitrust law is based on consumer harm. But it used to be in the Brandesian days based on competition, where it said if competition is suppressed for long enough, ultimately a company can charge monopoly-like profits. Look at the marketplace. The marketplace is valuing Amazon at a multiple of valuation of any other retailer, and the market is telling us that at some point this company is going to be able to charge monopoly-like prices because it's putting every other retailer.
Is there evidence? Because the problem with Facebook is, so we break up Facebook, you break up Amazon, who else would you break up? Google?
Oh, Google, spin YouTube and probably Google Cloud.
Right, and anybody else? Apple?
Well, Facebook, Apple's a tougher one because Apple...
There's competition everywhere for Apple.
True, and also with Apple, the key asset there is the brand. So who gets stewardship of the core asset, the brand? So that's a difficult one. I think in the case of the App Store, that might require regulation, not antitrust, if you will.
Why, and the Supreme Court obviously is looking at that, why would regulation not work in the case of these other companies? But I can see maybe Amazon Web Services, it's more difficult to do a regulatory issue because they're very different.
Yeah.
The components are very different. But in the case of Facebook, there is a commonality that could be regulated between the three.
Yeah, I would argue that antitrust is sort of the gift that keeps on giving, that if you look at almost every antitrust action, there's very few government interventions that kind of always work. And it would be difficult to find an instance where antitrust and breaking up companies didn't work. So I think that's sort of the go-to, is break them up and let them flourish. Most tech spins have resulted in been accretive to shareholder value. So I actually think antitrust and breaking them up is the more capitalist thing to do before you go to regulation.
Funny, when we started the discussion, we had about 75% of people saying that no, they shouldn't be broken up. Your argument is obviously persuasive because you're now...
Not persuasive enough.
Well, no, 67%.
Oh, they said yes or no?
While you've been arguing, while you've been discussing, 67% now say they should be broken up. Do you hold out any realistic possibility that action will be taken? I mean, at the moment, every Democratic presidential candidate wants to break up everything.
Yeah, I do think for the first time, I actually believe the worm has turned and we're moving towards antitrust. However, where it might happen or where you might see the seeds of it is abroad. And that is, in Europe, they register all of the downside of big tech, the job destruction, monopoly behavior, the abuse of the platforms, but they recognize a fraction of the upside. So I think they will make it so difficult for these companies that ultimately they start to maybe even prophylactically decide to do this. My big prediction, Richard, is that Jeff Bezos, the smartest man in business, prophylactically spins AWS such that he can stave off regulation and antitrust.